If workplace culture is your jam, you're in the right place. Check out this episode of Culture Secrets, the podcast dedicated to creating workplaces where both employees and the companies thrive.
Welcome to the Culture Secrets podcast with your host, international best-selling author and workplace culture strategist, Chellie Phillips. Today, Chellie sits down with someone who has spent his entire career championing the cooperative business model and the cultures that make it thrive. Adam Schwartz is the founder and principal of the Cooperative Way, a consulting firm dedicated to helping cooperatives in every sector succeed by turning co-op principles and values into a real strategic advantage. He's a longtime advocate for electric cooperatives and other member-owned businesses, a hashtag #GoCoop columnist, an adjunct professor teaching the cooperative business model at the University of Mary Washington, and a frequent speaker and media guest on CNN and MSNBC, talking about why cooperatives are, in his words, the best business model on earth. In this conversation, Adam and Chellie explore what it really means to build a healthy cooperative culture. You'll hear how a safety initiative in the co-op world became his light bulb moment for understanding that with intention and persistence, you can actually design the culture you want, then measure whether it's working. Adam will unpack why culture is to an organization what water is to a fish, what servant leadership looks like when you combine empathy and accountability, and why hanging on to low-performing employees is more of a culture suck than an act of kindness. They'll dig into practical ways co-op leaders can use surveys and real data, not just gut feelings, to understand what's really happening inside their culture. Hire and promote for cultural fit, not just technical skill, so you don't look like every other utility on the block. Keep the cooperative difference front and center for a new generation of mission-driven employees who want their work to matter. Influence culture even if you're not the CEO by tying your ideas to your leader's goals and KPIs. If you've ever wondered how to move from "we should work on culture someday" to actually creating a place where people are proud to work and proud to serve their members, this episode is for you. Now, here's your host, Chellie Phillips, with her conversation with Adam Schwartz.
First, thanks for taking time to do this. I know you stay hopping. Give me a little bit of your background, like how you got to where you are right now, and where did culture become something that you were just interested in diving into?
Well, it all started in a log cabin in Brooklyn, New York, and on a snowy day. So I, went to school in upstate New York, and there was a bookstore co-op but I didn't really understand it. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and we had lots of housing co-ops, but didn't really understand what that meant at the time. Just we called it the co-op. And then after I graduated and traveled a bit, I came and was a lobbyist in D.C. and then just applied for a job at the National Rural Electric Co-op Association and got hired as a lobbyist. So, one of those happenstance things. As so many people who seem to fall into co-ops, And then from there, I went to work for NRTC, Rural Telecommunications Co-op, and then the National Cooperative Business Association. And that's when I got to see a lot of different types of co-ops, purchasing, ag, food. I would travel a bit and see different co-ops and how they operate. And there was just places you just tell something was different, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a not so good way. And I would just, talk to people, what's their style of leadership, right? And observe as well, how they went about it. Probably it was, I think, 2007, Federated Insurance started this program called the Culture of Safety. Because they were tired of seeing the numbers go up and up on accidents and lost time accidents. And then I was watching their progress, and they would every year report on it, and the numbers started coming down. And I got talking to some of their folks, and they will be very quick to say it's not federated, but it is all the co-ops out there that have decided to take on safety as a very big cause. And I don't know how long have you been with electric co-ops?
25 years.
Yes. Okay. So you probably have seen the difference in emphasis, right? And, it's not uncommon for many co-ops that all employees go to the safety meeting. And, that might be once a month for an hour. That's a significant amount of payroll time that is put in to say, but there's been a significant amount of payoff for it. So that kind of just like, that was like the switch clicker for me. Like, if we're intentional about creating a specific type of culture, we can do it. It takes time and effort and persistence, but we can do it. And so I got to thinking, well, if we could do that about safety, can we do that about being a cooperative? Right? Can we infuse a cooperative culture in our co-ops? And it's going to take the same kind of effort, with folks. And I'm happy to report there are, quite a few co-ops that I think are doing quite a good job of doing that. Frequent things I say about it is that, culture is to an organization what water is to a fish. It's simply the environment that we're swimming in all the time. And they say, whoever they are, that fish don't even know they're in water unless one of two things happens. They get a hook in their mouth and they're outside the water, or the water is so toxic that they can't breathe in it. And we certainly never want the water to be so toxic in our co-op that, the culture is so bad that people leave because of it. Especially for an issue that is fixable with intention. And so a good bit of my work is working with, co-op leaders, one, to identify what the culture is, because that's always an interesting experiment, asking the employees, what's the culture like here? And I will get many different answers to that question. And then, whiteboard one is all those different answers. All right. Now let's talk about what do we want it to be? And then have them work in small groups and figure out like what would be the culture they would like. And everyone, has an opportunity to have their voice and identify, and kind of like going through a funnel process. We're going to winnow through it. And then we come up with maybe a couple of different words of what we want the culture to be. Okay, now how are we going to do it? What does that look like? How do we act to have that kind of culture? And, thankfully, folks like going through that process, and I've gotten good feedback that it's helpful, but it needs to be consistent, and you really need to get a large percentage of the employees, top level employees, but even everybody in the organization, wherever they are, needs to at least be open-minded enough to attempt to buy into it. It's certainly, what happens sometimes is people talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. And that can be very disheartening to folks. So I think I've gone on long enough. So I'll take a break.
You mentioned the different styles of leadership.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe if you could take a minute and maybe describe what type of leader, or what is the style of leadership that can help drive a successful culture shift?
I'm a huge fan, I imagine you are too, of, the servant leadership model, right? A leader's true calling is to help others be successful. I've been fortunate. I've had some wonderful bosses, supervisors in my career, and I've had some awful bosses and supervisors. And what I say is I've learned from every one of them, right? And so I think that to be genuinely caring and empathetic, that recognizing that these are, real human beings with lives, and that there's lots of things. Everyone carries something, if not multiple things. So being understanding, but also being accountable. Right? We're going to be helpful to folks, and we're going to help them out in times of need. But we're also going to expect effort and accountability. And not just allow people to coast. I've seen, far too many co-ops have held on to employees, allowed them to stay on, even though it was widely known within the organization they're not performing up to standards. And people think that, that's the kind, empathetic thing to do. I reject that notion. I think we have an obligation to help them achieve, to help coach them, maybe find another position in the organization. But at the end of the day, if they're not accountable and not doing their job, it's much more of a culture suck than a culture add to terminate somebody. Co-ops that have finally reconciled with that fact, the employees will say, well, finally, what took them so long, right? It's not this anything goes and we're going to tolerate anything kind of attitude. Most definitely not. But it is one in which we will be empathetic and caring and kind and try and really learn, I think good leaders learn the appropriate amount of personal information about their employees, recognizing that some are willing to share more than others and respecting that. And also always enforcing the why. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, of why we're doing this. It's not just about kilowatt hours. It's about quality of life. And I think if we can make that connection that we're here for, a slightly larger purpose than just selling a commodity, I think we will do better, with productivity and connection, with employees. So I think good leaders will showcase those skills of empathy and accountability. Also curiosity, not feeling like I know all the answers. Good leaders understand that the frontline folks who are doing the job are often in the best position to suggest improvements to it. One of my great frustrations as a customer of companies is when someone will tell me, oh, I'd love to help you out, Mr. Schwartz, but we've got a policy that doesn't allow me to do that. Well, every time I hear that, then we've got a failure in this organization. There was a failure either from top to communicate to that frontline person why we have the policy, or there was a failure from the frontline people to communicate to their superiors that, we've got a policy here that's ticking off a lot of good customers, so we might want to think twice about that. And so I think regular communication with employees, the constant pursuit of replacing what's great with something even better. Not to say that we have to make the changes every time we recognize them, because I think people can burn out by too many changes, but that won't keep us from looking at improvements. And knowing that employees' opinions are going to be valued, even if not always listened to. So I'm a huge fan of employee satisfaction surveys, and a huge fan of leaders of the organization responding to those surveys in a very timely manner. This is what you said. This is what we heard. First, affirm that what we heard is what you said, right? Make sure that there's no miscommunication in what you're asking for and what we heard. And then explaining why or why not. We may do that. If it's something that leadership is open to trying, then maybe, there's a pilot program, a small group runs a pilot of that. Or if it's something that we're not going to be able to do, there was a co-op I'd worked with. They wanted a latte machine in the break room. Well, that was going to be about $5,000. And, the co-op didn't really think that was an appropriate way to spend the members' money on a latte machine. And they told the employees that. And the reason why. And that's fine. I got no problem with that, but acknowledge that that's what you heard. And this is why I said no. That example's from a number of years ago. I should follow up and see if they've ever done it, or maybe put in a paid latte machine, that's another option, right?
So I've done several interviews. I've talked to, one of my favorite was Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40. Okay. And I asked him, for a leader, if they had an inkling that something was going downhill with culture, like how would they start evaluating, or maybe, diving into this a little bit. And his first piece of advice was go sit in your parking lot and watch how your people enter work and how they exit work every day. And he said, it's very unscientific, but it's very accurate, and it'll tell you exactly, what you need to know about what's happening. So what advice might you give to someone in leadership that kind of had an inkling that maybe something's off here and I need to do something about it? Where should they start, and how should they go about kind of evaluating the situation that they're in?
Yeah, I have a true conflict here. There's part of my brain that works one way and another part that works another way. On the one hand, I do believe in gut instincts and instinctual feels about things. All right. On the other hand, I've certainly been suitably convinced to know that that data is very important. And this is, and the best I think that we can do around culture is surveys, I was smiling when you were saying the parking lot story because, when people were coming to an office very regularly, right? And there was a start time and an end time. Now we've gotten a little bit more flexible with that, with people coming in when they come in. Do people come on time? Is it at 4:30? Is there a mad rush, to the door? But also, that, and this is where the conflict is, because you know what? Someone could be having a great day at work, loving their job, but guess what? They got to pick up their kids, from school. And so they're leaving at 4:30, even if they're having the greatest day in their life, and so that's just reality. So that's where that anecdotal looking at the parking lot sometimes I think, might not be the best. And depending on the number of employees you have in your organization, most electric co-ops, are, unless you're in, the top tier, you've got less than 200 employees. So I think you can get to know 200 people, quite well. One of the companies I talk about, one of the few non-co-op companies that I talk about is the Gore company, the maker of Gore-Tex. Frank Gore started that company in the late 50s. And when DuPont wouldn't fund his research, he was an engineer with DuPont. And so he believed so much in his product that he quit his job, mortgaged his house, he and his wife, and they started their company. Well, there are over 10,000 employees now, privately held company, kind of mysterious in a way. But every time they grow by more than 200 people, they separate into separate divisions because they found that you can relate to 200 people. You can know 200 people. And for the vast majority of co-ops, that's a good sign. We can all know too. There are a couple, right here in Rappahannock, one of my clients, they're at over 400. So they're doing some other things I think are pretty cool, in having this leadership program, and they purposely put in the cohorts inside, outside people from different offices, creating more of that lattice network so that everyone's going to know someone else in a different office and different types of jobs. I'm a big fan of that. Job shadowing, an ear out to, how people are feeling, what's going on. Are they showing up at your employee appreciation day? And, are you doing some fun, exciting work at work, to keep people engaged and interested? That's why I like when co-ops take on new projects like bringing broadband or something. I think that gives us a real opportunity to energize our workforce in a way that maybe hasn't been seen in 70, 80 years when folks would first start bringing electricity to folks. And I do think the cooperative business model gives us a leg up on creating a wonderful culture in our co-op, because we're not here just serving outside investors who don't live in our community. There's a real connection to what we do and the difference it makes in people's lives. And I hope that we never lose sight of that.
And that ties in a lot to like the research that you're seeing is that this next generation of workers that are entering the workforce, or the ones that have just came into that, are very value and mission oriented. Yep. And the co-op story itself is all about value and mission. Yep. So how do leaders keep that from becoming, that's the old story, that's the stale version of what's happening, and do so in a way that positions them to attract this new talent that's coming in, so that we keep feeding into the co-op system this talent that we want, this very energetic, this engaged workforce that we need to be able to get these big things done?
One of my magic wand ideas, if I could just wave the wand and it would happen, is that we would learn as a society in every country in the world, in school, about the cooperative business model. That this would be something that would be taught, and it would be taught multiple times at different grades. There are curriculums that have been developed from K through 12, and then there's college level and graduate level courses about co-ops. So that work has already been done. It exists, right? So how can we get more folks to really see and understand the potential of this business model, and how when it's executed correctly, really does give us the opportunity to be a very values driven business, because that's our intention. All right, that's how we got. There was a business roundtable group that met in August of 2019. And this is the J.P. Morgans, the Apples, the who's who, Fortune 100 companies. And they came out with this huge pronouncement that investor-held, stock-held companies need to do more than just care about stock price. We need to care about our employees, about our customers, about the community, about the environment. And I just go, duh, really? Okay. It took you 125 years to figure that out. Cause that's what co-ops, have been all about, and what frustrates me, scares me, concerns me, worries me, is that when co-ops start losing that co-op identity, and then they look more like the industry that they're part of. So for an electric co-op, they start to look just like an IOU. Right. For a credit union, they look just like a bank. Okay. For an ag co-op, they just look like a mega food producer. All right. That they've lost that connection of being what a cooperative is, and they treat it as an afterthought, as an annoyance, as something we have to put up with. I realize that organizing, planning, and executing an annual meeting takes time, effort, and money, and can be a little bit frustrating. But it really should be a cause for celebration that we work for a business that needs to have an annual meeting, that has to have engagement with our members, and that we should be looking for ways not to look at these as things we have to do, but things that we want to do, and celebrate them, and why this is cause for great celebration. One of the things I ask in sessions, I go, how often do you celebrate your anniversary in your personal life? And most people answer every year. And I go, that's the correct answer, because if you don't celebrate it every year, you won't have an anniversary the next year to celebrate, right? And yet in our co-ops, we tend to celebrate, the 50th anniversary, the 75th anniversary, things like, well, if the 75th was a reason for celebration, well, then 76th is more of a reason, and the 77th is more. So I think every annual meeting should be a celebration. It should be a partial look back as to what we've done, but most of the meetings should be spent looking ahead. But what's the next challenge that we're going to face? I think, and there's so many innovative ways we could do the admire and acquire. I say plagiarism is stealing one person's idea. If you steal a lot of people's ideas, it's research. Everything I do is research. Sometimes it feels kind of strange, because really I'm just repurposing a lot of different ideas that I've heard. What makes me maybe a little bit different is I'm actually interested in finding out about these things and wanting to share them. And it's great fun, and it attracts really wonderful people. I would like to see us do a better job of recruiting and hiring people from other co-ops, other types of co-ops to work in our co-op. So if looking, when we are, out on Indeed or whatever, Monster, whatever, looking at folks who maybe have worked, if you're an electric co-op, if someone worked at a credit union or an ag co-op, and because they might have some experiences to bring to the table that would, help expand how we think about it, as well. So, again, I feel like I'm rambling, so I'll stop.
No, I love that. I've been really lucky in my co-op career to be involved with organizations that do put me with other types of co-ops like CCA and stuff. So, I tell everybody capital credits is part of what we all do, or annual meeting is what we all do, but it's neat to hear how other people are doing it and incorporating it, because when you listen to the same group over and over, you hear the same idea over and over again. And when you hear it from someone else's perspective, you're like, oh, well, that's a neat take, and it would work for me, and let me do something a little bit different to breathe some life into what's going on. So I can totally, I get behind that statement that you just said. I'm like, I'm all about branching out to some of our other co-op friends. One of the things that I hear a lot, especially since I've been working on this project, is if you're not the CEO looking are trying to make a culture change or suggest that there's some issues that we might want to look at to be able to push, there's not a line on the budget that says culture.
No.
And there's also some thinking maybe in upper management at times that it's this foo-foo kind of concept, and that there's not a real tangible thing that I can wrap my hand around to go, a bucket truck is X number of dollars, and I know we need that to work on the lines. So what do I need culture for? So maybe if you're trying to convince someone that we need to look at our culture and we need to do this kind of thing, what are the driving arguments that you can use to help push that forward?
I like asking questions. I like to get to know people. What are their life experiences? Right? If I'm talking to a leader who maybe has farming in their background, all right, I would ask them, how did you increase productivity on your farm? Okay, and they might say, well, I got better soil, right? I was more mindful of nutrients I put into the soil, okay, and how I did that. Okay, they were cultivating, right, knowing that if they do that as a preparatory step, that it's going to yield a better result. And I think culture, you can draw an analogy to culture with that, right? There's certain things that you need to do to cultivate how people are going to feel in the workplace. And asking them about their experience, how they would describe the culture. Talk about jobs that they've had in the past, jobs that they've liked and jobs that they didn't. Why didn't they like the job? And ask them to really do a deeper analysis. What was that it didn't feel right? What was wrong? And, ask if they like to be asked their opinion about certain things, about their work life. And, most folks, because I don't like to tell people what to do because, I have no authority as a consultant to tell anyone to do anything. All right. All I have the authority and ability to do is to suggest that they consider something. Right? And hopefully, lead them on the trail that they'll take, themselves, And then the other, this is one of my favorite quotes, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. So for folks who are not at the leadership level, and I did a session on this at the Connect conference a few years back. I think it was titled How to Be in Charge When You're Not in Charge, is really find out what your supervisor's goals are. Okay. What are their KPIs, right? What are they getting measured on? Right. Then think about the idea that you have. How are you going to position that idea so it helps my boss achieve their KPIs? Right. So that we can build alignment. Okay. If we do this, this is the impact it's going to have, or may have it, right? Because we might not know. One of my new favorite quotes that I'm wearing out, but I will continue to do so, is Bill James. He's a baseball statistician. He developed a new way of thinking about baseball players' statistics, and it was sort of the premise behind the Moneyball, the movie and the book. How the Oakland A's, they were using his theory on how to identify players. So he's gotten in the baseball world a fair amount of celebrity status because of what he's done, and so he gets approached by people all the time. How's so and so player going to do next year? Right? And he says whenever he's asked that question, he feels like he needs to respond by saying this: "It's the future. No one knows." All right. So we spend a lot of time, preparing for the future, as well we should. Okay. But we have to recognize that we just don't know. Right. We should be mindful. We should do all the steps. We know that there's a high likelihood in North Dakota in January, we're going to have sub-freezing temperatures. Okay. Right. So we should make sure that our lines, our poles are tested for, 80 mile an hour wind. There's lots of things we can prepare for, not knowing, what exactly is going to happen. Just being curious of, what's the next thing, open-minded to accepting new ways of doing things, and just putting a big red circle with the slash through the comment, that's not the way we do it around here. That's just inappropriate thinking.
So, one of the big shifts that I'm hearing, I've talked to a few recruiters that I've been working on, is now recruiting for culture. And I had the pleasure of talking to Rich Sheridan with Menlo Group and Joy Inc., Chief Joy Officer. And he was talking about how they work as that when they invite them in for an interview, that they really don't talk about skill anymore, because you wouldn't have made it to the interview if they didn't think you had the skill. And what they do is they partner them up and see how they're going to work. And they tell their candidates that your job is to get the other person a second interview, because it's all about being a good teammate, and it's all about being able to help someone else along the way. Mm. And he said it was quite interesting to begin with, the looks that you got on people's faces. Like, you could see the internal conflict that, no, I want the second interview. I don't want them to get the second interview. How do you think co-ops are doing about hiring for culture? Are we still hiring basically for skill, or are you starting to see any kind of shift towards hiring for the values that matter to us and the attitude and things that we want to bring into the workforce?
I'm definitely seeing more emphasis on culture, and folks. I think Blue Ridge Energy out of North Carolina is one of my leading examples of that. Every single potential hire goes through a cultural screen, and if they are deemed not a cultural fit, even if their skills are off the charts, they will not get hired. So that is the example I know of the most forward, in my view, approach. One of the questions I ask supervisors is, have you ever gotten the question from an applicant, what's the culture like around here? Every year I ask that question, more and more hands are going up about that. So I do think that there's greater awareness about it. I have not done the data research to make a conclusive, decision that that we're doing it well or that we're doing it consistently. So I do think that it would be a kind of a scattered chart of probably there's some folks who are doing it quite well, others who may think that they're doing it, but maybe probably aren't. And then others who might be yeah, we'd like to do that, but we really need alignment, and I think that, desperation, depending on how long an opening's been going on, might have, influenced that. I think good organizations stay to their values in their hiring and don't. I think, while I certainly appreciate that sometimes there are emergency situations, but I think when we're in an emergency situation, I think looking at either contractors or some sort of temp work is a better way of going, maybe more expensive on the upfront, but hiring a person who's a bad cultural fit, wow. That will be a very, I talk about, there's an organization called Van City. It's a credit union in Vancouver, British Columbia, and they have an orientation and immersion program. All of their employees within the first month must go through it, and they allowed me to participate in it 5 years ago. So I spent the whole week up there learning how they do it. And at the end of the week, and it's all taught by fellow employees from different departments come in. Then they spend a day and a half in the field with members of the credit union, learning what the members do. And at the end of the 5 days, every new employee is offered $2,000 to leave. Just take the check, no hard feelings, goodbye. Because they have found that, as I'm sure you would attest to, that getting rid of an employee who's not going to be a good fit for $2,000 is the best bargain you'll ever have. There's no supervisor who, when I said, if I told you it cost you $2,000 to get rid of a problem employee, would you do that? Everyone, emphatic yes. And so what it does is it does that right up front, and it has the added impact of, after you've said yes to the job and refused the $2,000, that you've essentially bought your job, so you're kind of part of this tribe, this is another thing that we all share in common now, so I think, there's ways that we can do that, that kind of makes sense. And and hopefully help build it. Giving every employee the opportunity to select an educational opportunity that they would like to engage in every year, to help make them better, that there should be some connection to their job, but it could be a very loose connection. It could be learning more about this cooperative business model, right? Like that's, whatever it might be, showing folks that you value them being smart, I think, an important thing.
I know we're getting close. So one last question real quick. You talked about surveys being really the measure that you had to go by. If you were going to start this process, because some people have never asked their employees what they think.
Right.
And I'm a big proponent of it. If you ask it, you've got to deal with it one way or the other. You can't ask it and then just put it on a shelf and pretend like we never asked the first time.
Right.
So if you were going into this is the first time that we've asked our employees and we're getting ready to really take a look at this, what's the advice that you would have, or what are the key questions that you might want to make sure that you ask on there? And then on the flip side, once you get the results back in, how do you make sure that you give them the attention that they need as far as, oh, this is just one person's sour grapes. It's not really, you want to say, so like, how do you validify what you're getting versus someone's just very disgruntled or that kind of thing, the mindset that you come into?
Yeah. So I'm part of a co-op of 45 consultants, and a couple of my colleagues, this is what they do for a living. They do surveys. They will do hundreds in a year. The format that I'm a big fan of is the 1 to 5 or 1 to 7, strongly disagree to strongly agree. It should be a double-blind survey, okay, meaning that we are not going to know who filled out the survey. We might know the department, depending on the size of the co-op, so that the employees can be guaranteed, that their animosity their anonymity will be protected. And that is an absolute sacred vow that cannot be broken on that. And that you have the outside person review the comments, okay? And so if very simple, this, my employer encourages education. Okay. And you have someone who says strongly disagree and says in the comments, they don't value education, but yet, based on the rest of most everyone else puts that as a 5. I strongly agree. They give every employee an opportunity to have, education, provided to them. Well, then that one comment of that person who said that, the client is never going to see that comment. Okay. Because the data doesn't support it. It's just wrong. Now, you might say to the client, there may be some people who don't understand the educational, offerings that you have. So you might want to do a better job of doing that. But I'm not going to poison their mind with that sour grapes comment. If, on the other hand, the data says, I strongly disagree, they don't provide education, well, then absolutely the client's going to see that data because it's borne out, by the comments. So I think it's very important that we do that type of survey. And I think it's important that we do it as a benchmark, that when we do it the first time, we make a commitment that we're going to do it at least one more time, in a year or two, so that we're going to measure, progress or regression, as it may be. And that the results, all of the results, not all of the comments, but all of the top level data will be shared. We will have an all-employee meeting, and if the co-op's too big for everyone to be in one meeting, we'll do it in 2 or 3 meetings. But we're going to share the same information, and we're going to tell you, what we've heard, and then we're going to say, we're going to consider some of these ideas, and we're going to be back to you. And everything that we're going to do in respect to our employees is going to be based on this information, because then that's going to get future buy-in for the survey. People will know, okay, all right, they really are paying attention. And at the end of the day, people want to be heard, just hear me. And I think we'll do great. So I so enjoyed talking about this stuff, as I hope it shows.
Yeah.
So thank you for thinking about it and writing about it. We are all better. We will be better for more people discussing this. So thank you so much. Really.
All right. Thanks so much, Adam. Have a great day.
All right. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Culture Secrets. If today's conversation resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with a colleague or friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more about building strong, people-first workplace cultures, visit www.chelliphillips.com, where you'll find resources, speaking information, and more insights from Chellie. You can also pick up a copy of Culture Secrets at your favorite online or in-person bookseller. Thanks again for listening. And remember, culture isn't something you talk about once. It's something you live every day.